All right, so now that we have unpacked our presets and we have the whole package here on Lightroom, I just wanted to take some time to walk through everything that's available in this package. Everything from the actual developer presets to the tools that I have. I'm not going to spend extensive time editing a lot of images. I'll save that for another video. So for right now, let's just start with this image that I have of Shay. She's a bride that we worked with in the fall of 2019. Her and her husband Carter are awesome. They're hilarious, great friends of ours now. So I'm just going to start with this raw photo and tell you that the first thing about these presets is that none of them affect your white balance or your exposure. So if you wanted to, say on a engagement shoot or an indoor shoot or some type of portrait shoot, even landscapes, if you wanted to adjust your exposure across the board or get white balances already leveled out, none of these presets are going to change that. So it's easy to copy and clear those settings across multiple images without messing up the preset. So that being said, I need to adjust the exposure before I start editing. So I'm going to go ahead and on this photo of Shay, I'm just going to go ahead and bring the exposure up to just get a nice clean, even image. It's already a really clean image, which is why I'm using it right now. So I've bumped it up to about 0.9 exposure. The temperature looks okay. I'm going to raise it just a little bit, and the tint is probably okay as well. I think her skin's probably going to look fine even with the preset on it. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of cropping and adjusting. So if I were to deliver this to her, which I did, I'd probably go ahead and get this cropped not so tall. Sometimes super tall images just aren't really going to work well. So not sure if I liked how it evened that out, but okay, let's roll with it. All right, so got this image of Shay for some of her bridals on her wedding day. Let's go ahead and take a look at how some of the presets are going to affect it. So I'm just going to hover over connection here. So first preset off the bat, you can see what happened. I'm going to back off and bring it back on. So this preset connection is super punchy, really contrasty, really brought down those shadow details and deepened them a lot. But then the highlights were boosted a bit to where they're really bright, really sharp. You can see the skin tones, obviously the red, pink, orange skin tones and mid tones of her skin are really smoothed out and evened. And that's one thing that I'm like super proud of with this preset is that even as contrasty and punchy as it is, it's really clean through the skin tones. And if I go down to experience, the next preset here, it's just a little bit softer version of that. So you can see some of the detail and light come back into the shadows. The greens are changed just a little bit. There's a little bit of brightness to the greens that comes back in experience. Both of these have toned down greens just a tad to where they're still green. I don't like killing the greens. And so they're still there, but they're toned down to something manageable, especially if you're going to do an engagement shoot in the middle of the forest. You don't want those greens too crazy real because even in person, sometimes they're just overbearing. They're going to be reflecting onto skin and it's tough to work with. So I really like the experience preset, especially for landscapes, because it's just a punched up version of what you saw with kind of even tones. But it is really, really fantastic for portraits, entire wedding days and stuff like that too. Now, Truth is the most even keel preset of the pack. That's why it's called Truth. So I've got Connection, Experience, and then Truth. You can see what happens with Truth is that the brightness of those skin tones, the oranges, the yellows, the reds, it's toned down just a little bit more to where everything's a little bit more matte. And what this preset is actually my version of a film emulation. So I've taken all of the film that I've shot over the past, 4 years, and I've been able to edit those film scans, give them a little touch of contrast and even out some of the colors that I want to keep and that I want a little bit less of. And then I was able to take my digital presets and get them a little bit closer to that. So this is the most toned down version of my digital presets. It's going to look most what film is really going to look like. I actually shot Portrait 400 on this wedding day, and so I know exactly what that film is going to look like in this scene. And then the fourth preset I have in the pack is Experience Black and White. This is a nice, punchy, contrasty black and white that I love. More than natural black and white film stocks, this one focuses on those skin tones a little bit. In the black and white mix, you'll see what I've done with the oranges and yellow tones, because Lightroom is still going to pick up on that on digital images. Even if it's made black and white, it still knows what colors are which. And so you're able to even those skin tones in a black and white photo in a way that you can't really do with black and white film that's already been shot. And so really proud of this one. Really love how this one looks on any number of scenes, everything from a sparkler exit to a photo in Yosemite to a bridal right here in the middle of the day. Now, with all these presets, I'm going to go ahead and put on experience just so you can see what happens with the rest of these tools, because those are my 4 main presets, but then I've got a lot of tools to help use in tandem with those presets. And so all of these presets come with a light amount of grain, and I'll go ahead and scroll down so you can see the grain settings here that you're going to be using. So here's the grain. They all start with a light amount of grain. Now, if you wanted to turn that grain off and you just want a clean digital image, you may or may not be able to see in this video, but especially in the cleaner areas of the photo, like these white spaces and on the skin, you can see where there's a light amount of grain. And so in that, I can simply turn the grain off. And now I've got a super polished, clean digital image. This was only shot at 100 ISO, so there's really no noise or grain or grit at all in the image. And a lot of you shoot digital because that's what you're going for. Me, I like to blend the digital and the film, so I like a light amount of grain. I also like a medium amount of grain. So my medium grain is going to look more like the finest grain 35 millimeter stocks, like say Portra 160 or even Ektar. They have really light amounts, really fine grain, but on 35 millimeter, they still come up as kind of a medium weight compared to what I can do on Lightroom. So you can see the settings there. And then heavy is more like a high speed film. You can see how much grain that just added already. So heavy is more like a high speed black and white film. It's something that I use a lot on photos that I know I want to make a big panorama of. Sometimes it just looks really cool to add that grain across the board, but it's also something I avoid if a photo has too much going on. If it's a really busy photo, has a ton of contrast here and there, I'm probably not going to use a heavy grain on it because it's just one more big distracting thing to add to the image. For this, I think heavy actually looks pretty cool. There's a lot of white negative space in this photo, even though it's kind of busy in the background with the different window panes and stuff like that. But I'm going to leave that on there for now. So you can see how the grain tools work. Now let's look at the toning tools that I have. Now, soften is going to do exactly what it says, and it's going to be most dramatic on a preset like connection, where we have this sharp contrast. But I'm going to do it right here too. Right now we have the experience preset with heavy grain. And so if I add soften to it, you can see what happens there. The highlights and shadows are both softened just a little bit. What happens in the preset, if I scroll up here and actually click it, if I click soften, you'll see that contrast goes down, highlights go down, shadows go up, and the clarity even goes back down to be zeroed out. And so this really just softens the image overall, does exactly what it said. It's helpful even on presets that are already soft, like the truth preset. If I softened that one up, it would do the same thing, but kind of add its own touch to what that preset is in the curves. And then brighten, again, doing exactly what it says. So if I started just with experience, had the heavy grain again, and then I put brighten on there, it's going to brighten that image up. So the detail in the shadows is saved big time. It's going to actually bring the highlights and the whites up a little bit. So even the overtones are getting a little bit of a boost there. And that, what that does is it gives you a sense of brightness with avoiding doing the overall exposure of the image. Because if you overall expose the image, it is also exposing all of the midtones, all of the colors, a lot of other things that you may not want to affect. And so brightening the image by using just some of the shadows and highlights and even the whites in there can allow you to have a little bit more control. And that's why I created that tool for you. Now, the other two toning tools that I have are actually split toning. I used to do a lot of split toning in my work, especially when I was working for brands. It's one way that you can create a really unique look and personality to your images, but I stepped away from doing it especially on portraits and weddings for a while, just because sometimes it can really distract from skin tones. So I added some really faint split toning just to add a little bit of personality to these images. So I'm going to go back, set this back to experience with a heavy grain, and show you this warm split. And if I scroll down and show you the actual split toning settings, you'll see how faint it is, but how powerful it is too. So a little warm split in the toning. This is TBP toning 3. You can see that it adds a little bit of this warmth to the highlights and adds a little bit to the shadows as well, just a tad. And that's actually a little bit of like a warm green. Now, I would never add that color at 110. I would never add that hue to the highlights because it's going to make skin just look sick. But adding a healthy, warm glow to the skin gets really balanced and anchored out by a little bit of that green in the shadows. And I also think it just gives it an extra film look. And so here it was without that. And then here it is with the warmth. And so you can really see, you know, it's just faint, but man, if you put that across all your images in a gallery, it's really going to bring it together and give it a really cool consistency. Now the cool split is probably my favorite though. It's really dramatic once I go from the warm split to the cool split because I warmed it up and then cooled it right back down. But it's also more dramatic split toning overall. I added a pretty heavy blue tint to the highlights, but then anchored that with some warmth in the shadows. And so it really keeps it balanced without overdoing it too much. If I were to add the cool split to this image and I wanted to call it finalized to where I could really deliver it, I would probably go ahead and brighten it up another tad. And then I would warm it up overall just a tad. So there was the raw, and here's this final image. I really like that. I actually might bring the exposure right back down, and instead I might do a brush tool to lighten just the skin a little bit to bring a little bit more attention to her. I might even use a darkening tool to add some vignette, maybe darken this plant that's right here in the foreground, and I would call that a finished image. So I hope just getting to play with this image and go through the preset pack really shows you what's available here. The only one that I haven't mentioned is right here at the bottom, the TBP Extra Real Film Scans. This is for people who are shooting real film and you're getting back actual film scans from the lab. You can put those JPEG images onto Lightroom, and this is a preset overlay that I use to add a little bit of contrast and tone the colors a little bit with the films that I shoot, mostly the portrait stocks, but I've been experimenting more lately with some different Fuji stocks as well. And I will have a video later to show you how I actually edit and alter my film scans. But for now, this has been a great overview of the preset pack in general. If you have questions, please reach out to me on Instagram or even email me directly, and I would love to be able to help out and make sure that you can get faster, more consistent images by using this package. See you guys.